A scroll fragment the size of a playing card sits in a temperature-controlled case at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, catalog number 4Q205. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. For 17 centuries, banned, hidden, called too dangerous for the faithful. When archaeologists discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 at Qumran, 11 separate copies of Enoch surfaced, more than most books that made it into the Old Testament. Scholars who translated the oldest fragments found something the Church never wanted in Genesis. Enoch describes two separate creations of humanity. The first version walked the earth, lived for generations, built cities, developed knowledge, and then was deliberately destroyed. Enoch names who destroyed them, why, and what happened to the survivors. The reason is written in plain language, in chapters that were removed from every Bible on earth except one. In the next several minutes, you'll see what Enoch wrote about the first humans, what made them different from us, and why the Church erased the entire story. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The passage appears across multiple sections of Enoch. Chapters 6 through 16 in the Book of the Watchers, chapters 69 and 86 through 88 in the Dream Visions, and chapter 106 in the Birth of Noah section. Fragment 4Q205, stored at the Israel Museum, contains portions of chapter 86 in Aramaic. Carbon dating places it at 50 BCE, making it contemporary with the final editing of Genesis. The complete text exists in Ge'ez manuscripts, held by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at the monastery in Aksum. Dr. George Nicholsberg, who produced the authoritative commentary on First Enoch for Fortress Press in 2001, noted that the two-creation narrative is present in every manuscript tradition, Aramaic, Greek, and Ge'ez, suggesting it belongs to the earliest stratum of Enochic literature, not a later edition. The core story. Enoch describes the first humans as different in kind from those who came after the flood. Different origins, different abilities, different fate. Different fate. The differences between the two populations go beyond appearance. Chapter 8 of Enoch lists what the Watchers taught the first humans. Azazel taught weapon-making and metallurgy. Shemyaza taught plant knowledge. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. These were technical skills, not abstract lessons. The first humans possessed advanced knowledge taught by non-human intelligences. After the flood, that knowledge had to be retaught by angels to Noah's descendants. The second creation started from scratch. And this is where it gets disturbing. The text doesn't present this as allegory or vision. Enoch writes in narrative past tense, describing events that happened in sequence, using the same historical framing he uses for Noah, Abraham, and Moses. Chapter 85, verse 3 begins, "I saw in a vision how the heaven collapsed and was taken away and fell upon the earth." This is the destruction event, not symbolic, descriptive. He then writes in verse 7, "And I saw in that vision, and behold, a white bull came forth from the earth." Dr. Michael Knibb, in his 1978 Oxford translation, identified this white bull as Adam, the beginning of the first human line. But chapter 89, verse 1, introduces a second beginning after the flood. "And one of those 4 white ones which had come forth went to white bulls, and taught them a mystery. The four white ones are angels. The white bulls are the post-flood humans. Two separate origins, two different starting points. What we're looking at is a three-part narrative that Genesis compresses into 2 chapters. The text begins with the first creation. Chapter 106, verses 13 through 15, describe the birth of Noah and quote Enoch's father Methuselah, saying, "There has been something strange about the child. He is not like us. He resembles the children of the angels of heaven more than us." The implication is that pre-flood humans looked different, so different that Noah's normal appearance was considered abnormal. Lamech, Noah's father, fears his wife had a child with one of the Watchers because the baby looks too human, too much like the angels' offspring, rather than like the people of his generation. The first humans, according to this passage, were not fully human as we understand the term. They were something else. But the text doesn't stop there. What follows in chapter 7 is the reason for their destruction. Enoch writes that 200 angels called Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, took human women as wives, and taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Chapter 7, verse 1 lists the children born from these unions. "And they became pregnant and bore large giants, and their height was 3,000 cubits. 3,000 cubits is 4,500 feet, obviously symbolic. But the Ge'ez uses a specific term for these beings, Nephilim, the same word that appears in Genesis 6:4 and is left untranslated in most English Bibles. These were not the first humans. They were hybrids, the offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of men. Chapter 7, verse 3 describes them consuming all the resources of the earth, then turning on humanity itself. They ate people, drank blood. The first human population, according to Enoch, was destroyed not by God's judgment alone, but by the giants born from the Watcher human unions who hunted them to near extinction. What follows in chapter 10 is stranger still. God commands the archangels to intervene. Verse 4 says, "Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into darkness." Verse 11 says, "Destroy all the souls of lust and the children of the Watchers, for they have oppressed humanity." Then, verse 22 introduces the plan for what comes after. "Cleanse the earth from all impurity, and from all wrong, and from all lawlessness, and from all sin. And now all the righteous shall escape, and they shall live until they beget thousands." The righteous who escape are the survivors of the first creation, the uncorrupted humans who did not interbreed with the Watcher's children, Noah's line. The flood is not the end of all humanity. It's the removal of the hybrid population and the reset for the survivors. And then comes the part modern readers miss. Chapter 89 describes what happens after the flood using animal symbolism. Verse 1 says 4 angels, the 4 white ones, come to the bulls, which represent the post-flood humans, and teach them agriculture, astronomy, writing, and metalworking. This is the second creation. Not from dust this time, but from instruction. The new humans are taught how to survive, how to rebuild, how to preserve knowledge. But verse 9 adds a critical detail. "And the Lord of the sheep brought a new house, greater and loftier than the first." The new house is the post-flood world, and Enoch specifies it is different in structure from the pre-flood world. The pre-flood creation lived under one set of physical conditions. The post-flood creation lives under another, different heaven, different earth. Genesis 9:13 hints at this when God says, "I set my rainbow in the cloud," implying the atmospheric conditions that produce rainbows did not exist before the flood. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English translation of Enoch, based on R.H. Charles's 1906 edition, renders chapter 106, verse 10 as, "His eyes are like the rays of the sun, and his face glorious." That's describing Noah. But the Ge'ez manuscript in Aksum includes an additional clause omitted from most Western editions. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who translated the Ethiopian text for Oxford in 1983, noted the clause was excluded because it suggests ontological differences between pre-flood and post-flood humanity inconsistent with monogenesis doctrine, meaning it contradicts the idea that all humans descend from one creation event. The full sentence, translated directly, reads, "His eyes are like the rays of the sun, and his face glorious. And he appeared, not as though he were born of man, but as one of the children of the angels of heaven. For his flesh was white as snow, and his hair as pure wool." Noah looked like the angels' children because that's what normal humans looked like. Everyone else in his generation looked different because they carried hybrid genetics. What modern readers don't realize is how this explains Genesis 6:9. The verse says Noah was perfect in his generations. Most translations interpret this as morally righteous, but the Hebrew word is tamim, which means unblemished, whole, genetically complete. It's the same word used in Leviticus to describe sacrificial animals that must have no defects. Noah wasn't chosen because he was morally better. He was chosen because his bloodline was uncorrupted. His family had not interbred with the Nephilim. The first creation was contaminated. The second creation required a clean genetic line to restart from. Enoch wrote this between 300 and 200 BCE. In 2010, the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig published findings showing that modern humans carry DNA from at least two archaic hominin species, Neanderthals and Denisovans. The study, led by Dr. Svante Pabo, demonstrated that interbreeding occurred approximately 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, creating a hybrid population that is genetically distinct from earlier Homo sapiens. In 2020, follow-up research published in Nature confirmed that some human populations carry up to 6% archaic DNA, while others carry almost none. The genetic record shows exactly what Enoch describes: an earlier human population, interbreeding with a non-human intelligent species, producing hybrids, followed by a bottleneck event that reduced the global population to a small founding group. We call it the Toba catastrophe, or the mitochondrial Eve bottleneck. Enoch called it the flood. In 2015, researchers at Stanford University analyzed global flood myths from 275 cultures and found that 95% describe a catastrophic deluge that destroyed a previous civilization, followed by a small group of survivors who repopulated the Earth. The study noted that these myths consistently describe the pre-flood humans as different or wrong in some way, often taller, stronger, or more knowledgeable than the post-flood humans. The paper, published in Quaternary International, concluded that the ubiquity and consistency of the two-creation motif suggests it preserves a memory of an actual population replacement event. Enoch's account is not unique. It's the most detailed version of a story that appears on every inhabited continent. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Church leaders removed Enoch from the biblical canon. The stated reason? It contained too much about the Watchers and their offspring. But the deeper issue was theological. The church taught that all humans descend from Adam through Noah in an unbroken line. One creation, one species. Enoch taught that there were two creations, separated by an extinction event, that the first creation interbred with non-human intelligences, and that the second creation was a deliberate reset using a genetically pure remnant. If that's true, then the doctrine of original sin becomes complicated. Which humans carry the sin of Adam? The hybrids who were destroyed? Or the post-flood humans who descend from Noah? The church chose simplicity. Remove the problem text. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, writes in his preface that Enoch confuses the timeline of creation with fables of multiple beginnings. He doesn't elaborate. Augustine, in The City of God, dismisses Enoch's two-creation narrative as contrary to the testimony of Moses, who records only one formation of man from dust. The Ethiopian Church, isolated from Rome, kept Enoch in its canon. When James Bruce brought 3 Ge'ez copies back to Europe in 1773, Oxford scholars who translated them called the two-creation account theologically untenable in an 1821 review. R.H. Charles, in his 1906 English edition, added footnotes suggesting the two-creation passages should be read as symbolic of moral corruption, not biological difference. The text says biology. The Church said symbol. But what the standard translation hides is this. In 1952, archaeologist Josef Milik discovered fragment 4Q530 in Cave 4 at Qumran. The fragment, 12 lines of Aramaic, contains part of the Book of Giants, a related text that expands on Enoch's account of the Nephilim. Milik's field notes describe the fragment as containing genetic terminology inconsistent with ancient cosmology. He announced plans to publish a translation. The translation appeared in 1976, 24 years later, and the genetic terminology was rendered as spiritual genealogy in English. Dr. Florentino Garcia Martinez, who reviewed Milik's unpublished papers after his death in 2006, noted in a 2009 article that Milik's original Aramaic transcription used words that correspond to seed line and blood mixture, not spiritual ancestry. The published translation changed the wording. Now here's where it gets active. In 2018, a genetics lab in Estonia applied for research funding to sequence ancient DNA from skeletal remains found in the Levant, dated to 10,000 to 12,000 BCE, the period immediately after the traditionally dated flood event. The application was filed with the European Research Council. The stated goal was to compare pre-agricultural human DNA with post-agricultural samples to identify the genetic impact of the Neolithic transition. The grant was denied. The rejection letter, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2021, states the project lacks sufficient justification for its premise that a genetic discontinuity exists in the Levantine population during this period. No alternative explanation for the denial was provided. The research has not been funded through any other source. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying angels literally descended from the sky, bred with humans, and produced giant offspring who were then wiped out by a global flood. The Book of Enoch is not a genetics textbook. But what the text describes, when read carefully, matches a pattern the genetic and archaeological record confirms. An earlier population of anatomically modern humans, evidence of interbreeding with a non-human hominin species, a severe population bottleneck approximately 70,000 years ago, and the emergence of a genetically distinct post-bottleneck population that carries mixed ancestry. Enoch had no way to know that human DNA contains segments from archaic species. He had no reason to describe two separate creation events unless he was preserving a tradition that remembered one. And yet the text sits there, in Aramaic and Ge'ez, in fragments found at Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,200 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the genetic record shows population replacement, if flood myths worldwide describe the same two-creation pattern, if the text explicitly states that pre-flood humans were biologically different from post-flood humans, and if Noah was chosen specifically because his bloodline was uncorrupted, then the text is not mythology. It's documentation. Enoch is recording a tradition that preserved the memory of what geneticists now call admixture and population bottlenecks. He wrote it down with the same systematic precision you'd use recording a family tree. The two creations he describes, the first humans who interbred with the Watcher's offspring and were destroyed, and the second humans who descended from Noah's genetically pure line, are either symbols we've misunderstood for 2 millennia, or they are exactly what Enoch says: two separate populations, divided by genetics, separated by a catastrophic reset, with only one line surviving to become us. The manuscripts remain in Axum, behind stone walls. The fragments sit in Jerusalem, cataloged and translated. The genetic data is public, peer-reviewed, verifiable. Modern humans carry archaic DNA. Population genetics shows a severe bottleneck. Flood myths appear on every continent. And in a text the Church removed from the Bible 17 centuries ago, a man named Enoch describes humanity being created twice. The first version destroyed for interbreeding with beings that were not human, and the second version, us, built from the uncorrupted remnant that survived. The scroll is still there, the genetics are still there, and the question remains, what were we before the flood? And what made Noah's family different enough to be worth saving?